Hello folks, welcome to our opening of the Morgantown History Museum printing event called the History of Morgantown Printers. And today we have former colleagues in attendance that were printers over the years, and we're going to talk about the history of these printers and their print shops and how things have gone over the years. And first thing I'm going to do is talk about the locations of some of these printers. I did some of the history of the printers as much as I could tell from city directories and early printers in Morgantown. The earliest printer in Morgantown was a weekly newspaper called the Montague Gazette and the Morgantown Advertiser. And that was in 1803. And those printers here in Morgantown were the first printers west of the Alleghenies to have any kind of a print shop. They also, did job shop printings, which a lot of early newspapers did. They opened up, did a weekly newspaper, and then they would maybe print some stuff for people. And so then in 1864, the Morgantown Weekly Post, and Michael, who's blocking the screen?
We're not using it right now. Just go ahead.
Yeah, you're good.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, so anyhow, in 1864, the Morgantown Weekly Post ran. It was a weekly paper, of course, and in 1876, the New Dominion Weekly paper started. In 1897, the New Dominion was the first daily newspaper. And then in 1897, the ACME Press Printing, which later became Morgantown Printing and Binding, was on Front Street. Front Street is now University Avenue. And then there was 1914, there was a Mathers printer on Walnut Street. And 1914, I found a Crescent Printing on Wall Street. And there was a Chancery Row Printing on corner of Chancery Row and Chestnut, which I'll show you here in a little bit. In 1914, John Glover Printing was in a private home on Montague Avenue. 1915 and 1916 was Sunnyside Printing, Charles Henderson on Beverly Avenue, and I actually went over there to try to find it. The numbers have all changed, and some of these businesses were tore down, and so all I got is pictures of just what's there now. 1920, the Morgantown Press in the Blackstone building, which I haven't figured out what the Blackstone building was. I don't know if it's still there, but I think it's the corner right down the street here of Walnut and Chestnut. I know that there was a printer on one corner and a printer on another corner called Post. So still researching that. I'm going to get down to the Sanborn maps and find out exactly where they were at. But as you'll see later, I have a picture of these places. In 1922, Brock and Glasscock was on 222 Wall Street. There were a lot of printers on Wall Street over the years, from the 1920s all the way through. Then there was a place called Enterprise Press, which was on 143 Walnut Street, which I know nothing about, nor the owners. In 1924, the New Dominion shared the building right outside of the museum. They shared the building with Morgantown Printing and Binding. Acme Printing was the first first printer, and then Morgantown Printing and Binding, turned into Morgantown Printing and Binding. In 1927, Charles Henry Printing was on 318 High Street. I'll show you a picture of. 1927, Lawrence D. McFarland was on Wall Street. 1930, the New Dominion becomes the Dominion News. And in 1973, the Morgantown Post merged with the Dominion News, or merged with the Dominion News and became the Dominion News, the Dominion Post. Yes. So we're going to show you some slides here of the locations of these printers. This one is the ACME Printing Company. That is a building that's no longer there. The Davidson building is there now. I do believe that's the same location where it was a Davidson Funeral Home at one time, but it's a beautiful building, and if you look close, you can see the employees in front of it. They advertised in the city directory as having 175 employees. Whenever you have a letterpress type shop, like most of the ones were in the 1920s and all the way up to the 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, when Offset took over, you had a lot of employees that were doing a lot of setup work. And of course, over the years, the industry, through computers and stuff, got less and less employees, like every business. This one is current building that's on Front Street now. Well, it's University Avenue, but this is where ACME Printing started and then became Morgantown Printing and Binding. And the Ludwig family owned it for a while, and they had, actually, Morgantown Printing and Binding, the reason I put it first is because it's the standard big time printer in Morgantown. Over the years, it's become the print shop as far as color work and bookbinding and things like that. And but that building is now still down there beside, you can see the garage there beside it in downtown Morgantown on University Avenue, which used to be called Front Street. This is where Morgantown Printing and Binding, their second location. That building is right outside of our museum, and it's really funny. My dad came to Morgantown and started working there, and then later on, after he went to work for Sterling Printing, I started working there, and I was unloading paper. I can look out this back window and see the alley where we used to unload the paper and take it up the elevator. It's now a contractor, has operations in there. This is the current Morgantown Printing and Binding, and it's over in the curve on the Greenbag Road, and it's owned by Hoy Walls Andy, they call him the third. His dad is in attendance with him, with us today, and he's an honored guest. 95?
2.
94? 92? How do I get, okay. I'm really getting you up there, huh?
Wishful thinking.
But he has really helped me a lot over the years, over the last couple of years in my research. He can tell me where everything's located, and but this Morgantown Printing and Binding was owned for a number of years by Albert Everly, and his son Rod is in attendance with us today, and he sold the Morgantown Printing and Binding when he retired to Mr. Walls. And I have a little short video at the end of this slideshow to show you how much this shop has grown and still the biggest printer. I'm not sure, probably can say the biggest printer in West Virginia right now. That's on the Greenbag Road. This particular location is the COPYCAT on High Street, and it is across from the Federal Building on High Street, and it was in operation for a number of years. A lot of the printers that I'll be talking about, I'll say graduated from Morgantown Printing and Binding and became printers and opened up their own shops. And starting in I'd say the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, up to 2000, they all had their own shops. There were several shops, small printers in the area. And it was a booming time in Morgantown. Morgantown was growing, and there was plenty of printing for everybody. Over the years, though, this particular shop specialized in, and it was owned by the Reed family, Dorothy Reed in particular. And Dorothy specialized in copying, but as years go on, copy machines started showing up in our offices, and so, technology started changing, and people weren't going to copy shops anymore. They were using their own desktop, which I'll tell you later about my shop, how that happened to me too. But the next shop, this actually was the original Heralds printing. It was located behind near the Dairy Queen on Parkview Avenue in Westover. And this shop actually is the first shop that I ever really printed in. My dad had a little old hand-feed press like the one I'm going to show you here in a little bit, but my dad had a printer in our basement, and that's how I got, he showed me how to do it by hand, and I used that press for a while. But the house is totally different now. There used to be a basement, and you could drive down into it, and they've completely changed it. This next printer was at the intersection of, it's Printech Printing, and it was at the intersection of University Avenue and Beechurst. And it was in one of those doors right there, I believe 203 was the address. But the owner of that was Dr. and Mrs. Keller. Helen Keller, believe it or not, was her name. And I wanted to say that most of the printers, the small printers, we all worked together. We all had different things different strengths. And our particular strength was the numbering and perforating and die cutting. And a lot of the printers would bring stuff to us. We all exchanged stuff. We need a small copy job. We would go to Printech or COPYCAT or places like that. But Printech moved to the next place, which you now know as Wings Olay. And the reason that print shop moved there was because of me. I was having lunch at the original Wings and Things beside my dad's shop, and I was talking to Dan Nagowski, the owner, and I asked him where he was going to move to because they were widening University Avenue. And he says, well, I can't find any place downtown. He says, I want to stay downtown, but I can't find any place. And I said, well, guess what? Helen Keller wants to move. She wants to move to the country. And I said, maybe you should talk to her about that building. That was originally, well, maybe not originally, but a Firestone building. And there was a muffler shop in there at one time. And Printech shared actually with that building with the muffler shop. And that's right beside the Westover Bridge, for those of you who don't know. We're in Morgantown. And this is graphics printing, which Mr. Walls started. And he told me all about it in an interview that I did, which I'm going to post online later. But it says aerographics because I didn't have the graphics printing sign like I have here in the shop. But Mr. Walls retired and his son took over. His son had worked for Fairmont Printing, and he took over from Bud Everly at Morgantown Printing and Binding. That's how all that happened. The next printing shop was, I really didn't get to know these people. I'd been in there once or twice, but it was in Westover, across from the original Dairy Mart in Westover, right across the street in that double door. It's a small shop, and I'm really not sure who the owners were. I'm going to have to do some more research to find that out. But that, like I said, that was in Westover. There was also a Minuteman Press in the plaza down near the McDonald's in Westover. And then, of course, aerographics and graphics printing were located in the Curve in Westover. And then there was, and I don't have a picture because they tore the building down, of Summers Printing. And Mr. Summers was one of the longtime small printers in Morgantown. And he was trained by a gentleman named W.O. Morris, who had a shop on Chestnut Street, in the upper part of Chestnut Street. And Mr. Summers would not, his original shop, I was told, was on Route 73. And since he was trained by this gentleman on, it was called Taylor's Printing, so I may have the names a little bit backwards, but anyhow, there was a shop there on Chestnut Street, and this Mr. Morris trained him, and he would not compete against him for Morgantown Printing. He would go to Fairmont and get his work done. And then, unfortunately, the sad part of this is that Mr. Morris's wife got killed in a freak accident. A log came through the windshield and killed her in Fairmont or someplace. And so Mr. Morris, unfortunately, committed suicide and jumped off the high-level bridge in Fairmont. Well, after that happened, Mr. Summers moved into Morgantown, and this was my dad's shop here at the corner of University Avenue and Wharf Street. And the next building down, attached to that, was Wings and Things, and then there was a home, and then there was an alley, and then there was Mr. Summers' house and a shop behind it. And when the state came in to widen the road, they told me that the middle of that highway was going to be the front door of Wings and Things. So I thought that was kind of ironic. And so my dad's building was in the left two lanes, or the two lanes coming into Morgantown. And they tore all that down. And one morning I was coming into work at my dad's, and I said, I saw Mrs. Summers sweeping the sidewalk. And we became pretty good friends over the years. But when her husband passed in 1973, she kind of locked the doors and didn't really sell anything, except one thing. She sold to Hastings Funeral Home the press that we have here at the museum. And Hastings Funeral Home for years printed the funeral cards. And then when computers came along, Hastings donated this to the original Riverfront Museum started by Pam Ball, which was the original Morgantown History Museum when it moved up here. But Mrs. Summers, I said, Miss Summers, what's going to happen? Where are you going to move all that printing stuff? And she said, Well, the state paid me for it. They're going to salvage everything. And when she said that to me, everything's going through my mind, and I said, well, can I go in there and try to rescue some stuff from that print shop? And she said, oh yeah, just talk to my son Sonny first, because he's got to get a few things out of there. And so I think he took a typewriter maybe, but he went upstairs. I met with him, and he went upstairs, and he come back down with his box, and he says, look at this. And he opened it up, and it was pre-1950 baseball cards. And he didn't want any of the printing stuff. So he took those out, and he said, do what you want with it, because they were going to tear it down. So I sold out of that letterpress shop, which, before offset printing, I sold the lead out of that, they took the drawers and emptied the lead into 5 55-gallon barrels of lead. The lead was dumped in it, and they paid me $2,000 for it. So that was kind of part of the way I got started. When I took over from my dad in 1989, and so then I rescued a lot of stuff out of there, and it was in the basement of my home on Mayfield Avenue. My wife had a nice big basement, and some of the stuff that you'll see here when you come in to the museum came from that basement when I found out that the museum had a print shop upstairs, a little small print shop, and I heard on the radio that they had a press in here. So that's how I got involved with the museum. And so then later on, after the museum got started, I started volunteering a lot of work and getting this print shop set up in here the way you see it now. So go ahead, Ron. And then my dad started Westover Printing in 1976, and he started out at Heralds Printing in Westover, but then he moved it to the corner there, University Avenue and Wharf Street, and he didn't want to change the name. He was afraid of losing business because it was pretty competitive, with all the small printers back in those days. And so he bought this building right here, O.J. White, and we moved the presses in there. And then after that, my dad was in business for about 10 years. He paid for the building, and his ship came in 1989, and the state paid him for that building. And then I took over from my dad. My dad retired, and the state moved me over to the Greenbag Road, which here's the location. There's a plaza right out from Classics where this building is at, the plaza, and the medical center, home medical place is in there now. But I was right there where that van is at. And I was in there for 6 years, and the landlord raised the price and other things that were happening with the economy. I had to move and downsize, so I moved up to this next location. Where those cars are at and trucks, there was a building there, there was a big garage there, and I moved in there. And of course it was less rent, and I downsized, trying to keep going. And but it's tore down now. That's on Fairview Avenue. Then this was the Morgantown. There were a lot of printers on Pleasant Street in the early days, and this building right here is still there, and you can see it's they cut hair. Actually, the one on Wall Street cuts hair too, where the former printers used to be. So that was the Morgantown Post, and Mr. Walls tells me that the Dominion News and the Dominion Post, and they generally located on, over the years, on Pleasant Street, and then they moved across, moved around the corner. And Mr. Greer bought a place on Spruce Street, and they said Elk Street, so I'm not sure where that's at, but it must be back behind there. But at that time, probably, because of, there had to be letterpress set up and everything. And so then we move on to, oh yeah, one other thing. Mr. Walls also told me that on the corner where, what was the name of that, Walter's newsstand at one time? There was printers there, or the Post maybe had an office there, and downstairs they engraved, because back in those days to print, that was a whole industry on its own. And this corner, right at this corner here, facing Chancery Row beside the courthouse and Chestnut Street, there was a printer there named Mr. Breakiron, and he was a job shop too, and also did other kinds of work for a lot of years. And there were different printers located in this building over the last century, and there are a couple other printers that I've researched. I used to walk by there when I'd go downtown. I'd be at Morgantown Printing and Binding. My dad would be in there printing football programs for the university games. And so I'd be roaming around, and sometimes I'd walk downtown, but I could see this guy printing too. This is Charles Henry Printing. Don't know much about it, but where Spencer and Kuhn used to be, they've moved. But that door on the left there, the black door, the lady at the business next to the left of that door, I think it's Silver Pennies or something like that. But anyhow, she told me that they were upstairs, which didn't make sense to me too much, because printing presses are heavy, you know, and so I'm not sure about that yet. I got to do a little bit more research on that. But Mr. Henry was there pretty early in the 20th century, I believe.
So
And this one, I don't know who was in
I'm
there.
sorry, could you hear them? The
Pardon?
presses, could you hear the printing outside?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
See, I would think you would. I'm sorry, I just was.
It's okay. But I really, this building here is behind, it's all one building, but the corner to the right is Dominic, my name's
Claudio.
Pardon?
Claudio.
Yeah, Dominic Claudio's in there. And him and I've talked several times, and he told me definitely there was a printer at this location. But the confusing thing about it is, he thinks it was Morgantown Printing and Binding, but Morgantown Printing and Binding was on Front Street, and it was on Walnut Street, and it was on Kirk Street. And so we're not sure. We still got to do some research on that. And this is Morgantown Blueprint, owned by Mr. DeBerry. And he, that building's tore down now, but that to the left is the CMP building at the upper part of Chestnut Street. And across the street, behind the original Dairy Queen, was Taylor's Printing. And it was, now these printers, you know, were at different times during the last century, but Taylor's Printing is the one that Mr. Summers learned how to print at, and W.O. Morris did that. And his sister told me that she used to come over from Morgantown High School, Sarah Kennedy, and she called me from out west, and she told me that she used to go there in the back door behind the Dairy Queen and go into that shop all the time. And this was the original Morgantown blueprint. And this, like I said, they tore the building down. And now we're coming to the alley in downtown Morgantown, Wall Street. And there were several printers in there over the years. And one of the earliest one was Brock and Glasscock. For today, or I think that might say 221. But anyhow, I think that printer, two printers were in there at the same time at one point. Lawrence McFarland was in there, a printer. I took this picture the other day, and now there's, like I said, people that cut hair. And there was a gentleman named Bob Flowers. And if you're familiar with this building, this is a Citizens building on Walnut Street and High Street. And those of you from Morgantown know that there's a little steps that go down along the side of that building on Walnut Street, and he was down there. And my neighbor, Bill Schultz, told me that there was a Mr. Bob Flower or Mr. Flowers in that building at the early part of the century. And he did a lot of printing, and then when he passed, his son took everything out of there and moved it to Chestnut Street where the State Electronics was. He owned the State Electronics building, and he had his dad's printing stuff in there for a while. Well, one of the things that he had was a hand cutter, which is here in the museum. I have one here in the museum. I have that printer, or that cutter. I moved it. I found out it was over, Allison Kitzmiller told me it was over in Westover in a building that they owned, and she told me to come and get it. So I went over and got it and brought it over to the museum. And so that's how it got into here. So Mr. Flowers, I believe Tony Kitzmiller, I ran into him one time, and he told me that he used to print like I used to, hand feed letterpress. And he told me he did a lot of printing for him as a young man. So that's how the Kitzmillers I believe, were related to Mr. Flowers. This is where Taylor's Printing was. I told you about behind the Dairy Queen. The Dairy Queen's no longer there. They built a new building. But that parking lot right there is where Taylor's Printing was located. And this was where, on High Street at the corner of High and Walnut, and very old historic building, that's where the engravers were and the newspaper was at. And then I left this one for you to look at, and it's called Post Printing. And you have to look real close, but it says Post Printing on the building. There's someone looking out the window, but I believe this was, and also if you look real close behind it, there's the old stone house. The old stone house is still there. And so that's where the discrepancy is, where the Post and Morgantown Printing and Binding were located, which I got to do more research on that. But that's a real old picture. That's 1893. That's the oldest picture I could find of a local printer. And this is just a picture I put in there of the first printing press, Gutenberg's press. You can see how two people work on it, and the one guy's inking everything by hand. And I have pictures in the museum here. And when you come in the museum to visit the exhibit, you'll see various machinery, old-time machinery that was donated. Morgantown Printing and Binding donated some bookbinding equipment, which later on down the road, we're going to have other events in here about bookbinding. And then a gentleman named Eddie Spaghetti, who does specialty printing, with block printing by hand and on paper. And also Eve Falks from WVU Creative Arts Center will be coming in here and speak about how she makes limited print specialty books that I actually went down to the Scotts Run Museum and saw one of her books, and she made it into looked like a railroad tie, not a railroad. Help me out. What do you call those? A railroad? Not a railroad tie, but the actual rail. Yeah, and it looks like a rail. And you open it up, and she did tribute to all the miners that have been injured or killed in mines over the years in the Purse Glove. And I highly recommend you going to that museum too on Saturdays only from 10 to 2, because it's all about coal mining. Anybody who's been involved in coal mining. So, and it's a real small museum, but really well done. Eve Falks from WVU actually took it under her wing and fixed it up real good and did a lot of printing and stuff like that. And I failed to mention Vicki Christopher, who's the owner of the current Aerographics and Printing in Westover. She's the lone small printer, what I call a mom and pop shop. She's the lone survivor. And what happened to us small printers was, one day I was at my cutting table, or my cut and paste table, and a gentleman came in to proof a card that I had typeset at Printech. Printech did our typesetting for us, and the girl who did our typesetting, she is now the secretary of Bob Huggins, the basketball coach. But she was just a young girl then, and she worked on a $25,000 variant type machine. Had a little screen on it. It was a computer, but it was big. It was as big as this table here. And so I'd go down there on my lunch break and get corrections and stuff. And this gentleman's card his name was spelled wrong or something. And so I said, darn it. I said, now I got to run down Printech on my lunch break and get this corrected. And he says, well, you know, there's a better way to do that. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, well, there's a computer store that opened up down on South University Avenue that has a thing called an Apple Macintosh, which we have one of them on display here. And so I went down to look at it, and I could actually take the letters and move them around on the screen and then print them out. And I was blown away. I was like, whoa. So that's a big technology change. It's sort of like Gutenberg, you know, and the Linotype machine, when it came in, the Linotype was just a big, huge typewriter that a guy, Mr. Morgantown, invented, and it changed everything in printing, as Mr. Walls knows. And then there was the technology change with the Apple Macintosh computer. And so it freed me up from doing a lot of cut and pasting. And my dad, at 60-some years old, learned how to run the computer and started doing the typesetting and stuff. And we were the first print shop in Morgantown to have a computer of that kind. It wasn't quality printing, because if you took and looked in a magnifier, you could see the jagged edges and stuff. A place like Morgantown Printing and Binding, you wouldn't see jagged edges from those typesetters, but it was good enough and normal people didn't really see it unless they had a magnifying glass. So that changed everything, and that was good for a while. But then what happened was, years later, I started having my customers come in, and I'd say, so-and-so, are you going to get your invoices printed this year? 10,000 of them, 5,000 of them? And they say, oh no, we don't need to do that. My desktop computer prints them out for me. And I'm like, great, there's another customer lost. And with that happening, and we had a recession in 1992, and the big paper companies started putting a squeeze on the small printer here in Morgantown. They did not want to deliver to the small printer anymore. The big international paper bought out Alling & Corey, which was a regional paper distributor, and there was Alling & Corey, a distributor in Fairmont, 35 people working there, closed it down. Those people lost their jobs or had to move on to something else, and they started shipping it down to these small printers in Morgantown out of Pittsburgh. Now the problem with that is when you picked up the phone to order, they wanted you to order $500 worth of paper, or they didn't want to deliver it to you. That, and my landlord wanted to sell the building that I was in on Fairview Avenue, and I couldn't afford to do that. So my wife and I decided and I asked my mom if she minded if I just closed it down. It was time. And so that's how most small printers did. Most small printers had landlord problems where they had to move their business from one landlord to another. And I found out that happened over history. In New York City at one time, there were I forget my number. Anyhow, a lot of printers. And all across America, there were 400,000 printers, letterpress shops and things like that. Well, they would be in a building and the landlord would just want to sell and they'd have to move. Well, you just don't move print shops in those days, right, Mr. Walls, to all the heavy printing. And I actually have a picture of right here that Rod Everly brought in, and it shows them lifting a heavy press right outside here to move in a bigger press. And the presses got bigger and bigger and heavier, and you had to have a sturdy building if you were a big time printer. So I went out of business and became a school bus driver, and then I discovered this museum and the press here. So I give demonstrations. I'll be doing demonstrations once in a while when I feel like it. And you can come in, and the next thing I want to show you is back in the old days, the terms, you can see the terms, $1.50 a year cash in advance, $2 paid in 6 months, $2.50 after 6 months delayed. No paper will be discontinued until all arrangements are paid up except at the option of the publisher. So it's $1.50 6 months, I think. Okay. And these are the people who helped me, and forgive me if I forgot somebody. I had to change this several times. I forget people, but these are the people that have helped me with this exhibit. Some of them you know, some of them you don't know. But I wanted to thank everybody for helping me to do this research. And then also I have in memory of my dad, Albert Everly, Harry Jeffries, Dorothy Reed, Bill Christopher, Helen Keller, Skip Weaver, our pressman, our longtime pressman, Bob Justice, who also worked for us. And like I say, forgive me if I've forgotten somebody. Kind of get choked up about that. And too many other printers I was associated with over the years. I'd come up with this, but I'm sure somebody has said it before. Old printers never die, they just press on. So now we're going to play you a little video to show you what Morgantown Printing and Binding has come full circle. This is Andy Walls, And I walked in one day and took a little short film of his new printing press. This is 8 printing presses hooked together, and you start out on one end and you print 4 colors. It flips the sheet and prints 4 more colors on the back side. And since the dark room has now been eliminated, the film and everything, it just sends the plates to the it's automatically developed, and they put the plates on all those 8 presses and they print everything at once. My dad, when he worked for Morgantown Printing and Binding, he would print 4 color work, but guess what? He had to do it 4 times on one side and 4 times on another side. How long do you think that would take? Whereas Andy's doing it in this video right here, he's doing it 1 time, and he'll tell you that. Go ahead and run that.
You can print on a 40-inch sheet, both sides, 1 pass. Oh, really? Oh, wow. Wow, look at that. How about that? This is your newest print? How many is it 8 colors? So I'm printing 4 color on one side, 4 color on the other side, and turn the sheet over in the middle. Oh, okay. 1 pass is done. Where these presses will print one side, then you got to turn it over and print the other side. No kidding. Yeah. So that's what they're doing now. Yep. Wow. Yeah. That's awesome. Yep. You can hammer.
So that's how much technology has changed. My dad always told me, he said, you should get in color work. You gotta have financing to do that. But the next thing that I want to show you is what some of the things we're going to be doing here in the print shop. And one of the things we're going to be doing is, like I said, I'll be doing demonstrations on this press. And I'm going to turn it on for you here shortly, just so you see it runs. But this particular press, like I said, belonged to Summers Printing. Up here at Summers Printing, there's Printech Printing, COPYCAT, Shavers Printing, Westover Printing, and Aerographics and Printing. So this is how it operates. And when sorry if you can't see over that a little bit, but I'll show it to you later too. I'll run it for you later. But when I worked for Heralds Printing in my early 20s, I would just grab a WVU football ticket, put it in the press, take it out, and I got really good at it over the summertime. And I would just go like this all the time. And all summer long, imagine that. So I learned to be pretty good at it. Of course, there's a lot of work to it, just setting up an old hand press. But these presses have made a comeback in America. If you get online and type in letterpress in Google, you'll see all kind of printers all over America. Some of them making really good money printing this way. Because I did the research and they're doing high quality 4-color work. Very popular. Of course, it's fine printing. You're going to pay for it. Okay. One other thing I wanted to show you is the lockup, which is what printers had to do. They had their type cases and they had to get the letters out, put them in, read them backwards, and if you had a newspaper company, there was 100 people working. They all had their own station, and they had to take the letters out and put them, arrange them, and then they would lock them up. And here is, what this is here is a chase. It's called a chase. And you lock everything up. So that's a craft in its own. You had to put all the letters together. This particular is what I'm going to be printing. When people, I'll print them ahead of time, but it's going to be a bookmark for people to, I'll just hand them to them. I'll print them, has a Morgantown History Museum logo, and it says, Morgantown History Museum and the address on it. So I'll be giving those out. I wanted to mention Harry Jeffries. When he worked for Morgantown Printing and Binding for almost 50 years, and him and I were buddies when I was young. I used to cut paper for him and the other printers. And when Harry retired, I told him about this print shop I was setting up, and he used to come by one day a week, sometimes with his wife, and Harry would show me how to do this lockup, which I'm going to learn more about pretty soon from a printer in Lancaster, PA. If you're ever in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, there's a place that has a warehouse full of shops, and there's a working print shop. And Ken Kolakowski also has, you can read about it right here, but Ken has a place named after himself at a local university, and he also prints at this warehouse. They have some volunteers that come in 2 or 3 days a week and print for all those merchants. It's a working print shop, and so if you're ever there, it's called Building Character. That's the name of the warehouse, Building Character. So I highly recommend you going there, and I'm actually going to film him doing his stuff at his college and at his workplace to post online. Oh, that also reminds me, online on the Morgantown History site, if you go to Morgantown History site website and you click on YouTube, it'll take you to all the 60 or 70 videos that I've posted over the years about events we've had here. And there's also a playlist that's about printing, some of the printing demonstrations that I've done here. And I'll be posting that video on that site also. Okay, the next thing I want to do is show you something else that we're going to be doing here at the shop during this summer. This is called a Kelsey hand feed press. And this particular press was a quick short run type of press that you could print on. And what I'm going to do with this press, actually my relative, he made this. I couldn't find one. This is actually fabricated. He fabricated it at Wilson's Works. And so that I ordered some new rollers for it, and this fits perfectly. And I'll ink this press up when you come in. When I decide I want to demonstrate for a day, or a group comes in, and I will ahead of time print postcards that say Morgantown, History Museum on one side, and then on the other side I'll have locked up in this chase wording that says, I printed this postcard at the Morgantown History Museum, and then I'll give it to you, and you can go mail it to yourself. People that come in from across the country, because we have a lot of people from around the country when they visit Morgantown. They come down to this museum. We had people actually from around the world have come in here when they visit Morgantown to the university, or they stay at the Hotel Morgan next door. But this is how this particular press will work. Once I ink it up and have everything ready for, say you wanted to do it, then I'll just give it to them and they pull down on it, press it together, and print it. The ink goes around. You see that how it goes around? And just print like that. And a lot of printers use this as a proof press. They'd lock up the chase and they'd print one copy on this, and then they do the long run on the bigger press. I also have in the museum right over there a pedal press, which back in the early days, if you were going out west and you didn't have any electric or anything or any steam, printing presses first were hooked up to steam and then later on electric. I also have over here a hand cutter, which I'm going to fix up so I can cut paper. Nowadays, it's all done by hydraulics and big old hydraulic cutting machines. And the other last thing, whenever you come in, you'll see a short film of when they moved me over to the Greenbag Road. It shows my dad's shop in operation in the windmill press that is automatic. It's not by hand. That particular press you see on that screen right there is automatic. It just goes round and around. And Vicki Christopher has my dad's press over at Aerographics and Printing, and it's still hooked up. And I actually can go over there and print on it. And Vicki has been gracious enough to let me do that.
Do you want to play it?
No, we'll just show it to him later. Okay. And I just want to thank you all for coming to this event, and it's really happy to see the printers that are here. And I will be posting this on the website, Facebook webpage of the Morgantown History Museum. And so thank you very much for coming.